Rebecca Coleman was the bright and shining star of our college class, forever out of reach of mere mortals. She was the impossible dream written about in the song. She was a person that you looked at and just knew that cruel fate was telling you, "Eat your heart out, boy, because you can't have her." At least that's the way it looked and felt to a working-class guy like me. She had the classic good looks of the stereotypical California hard-body beach bunny. Except we were in the Midwest. Tall for a woman at 5'9" with blonde hair, big brown eyes, and a body that you could bounce quarters off of. Rebecca's clothes, makeup, and hairstyle were typical of the idle rich who had nothing better to do than groom themselves and party. I'm James Riley O'Connor, usually called Jamie, and met Rebecca in college, in unusual circumstances. She was 21, the queen of the elite social clique, master of her domain, a bit of a wild child, and excessively rich. I don't mean like very well-to-do. I mean like her dad buying the school and firing everyone if things didn't go well for his little girl. That's an exaggeration, but not by much. Rebecca, or I should say her father, had a lot of money. Mr. Coleman had gotten into a few .com companies at the beginning of the upward surge. He was smart enough, or lucky enough to get out, just as they started their descent back down to reality. Sometimes just hours before the company began its downward slide. His net worth was somewhere around $30 million. That's a lot of money by anyone's standards. I should explain Mr. Coleman's and therefore Rebecca's monetary status to show how bizarre it was that Rebecca and I even met. I was 25, a little older than most college seniors because I had worked for almost 3 years as an auto mechanic in my father's garage before I enrolled in school. It was at my dad's urging that I went to school. He wanted more for me than just being a grease monkey. I agreed with him. I was a good mechanic, but it wasn't something I wanted to do for the rest of my life. I wanted to pay my own way in college. That's why the 3-year stint working with my dad. The only thing I accepted from my parents was free room and board for the 3 years before leaving for college. That's a lot when you're trying to save money. In addition, when I started classes, I worked 3 nights a week and 2 weekends a month at the UPS loading dock so I could continue my education. I didn't take a summer vacations but took a reduced class load and worked full-time through the break. It was around midnight, and I was on my way back to my room after work. I was taking a short cut through the common area between the dorms and heard noises coming from the barbecue Ramada between 2 of the buildings. I'm no hero, but I didn't like the sounds coming from the Ramada. Of course, I had to see what was going on and walked over to investigate. A college campus is one of the most dangerous places in the country for young women. The instances of sexual assault are very high per capita. I guess the 3 men, and I use that term very loosely, decided that our school had to uphold that ranking. They had a young lady on her back, spread eagle on a picnic table in the Ramada. One of the guys was standing between the girls' legs, spreading them apart, and the other 2 each held an arm. They were trying to keep the girl's mouth covered to keep her quiet, but 1 or 2 screams escaped. Actually, she wasn't screaming so much as she was calling them names and cussing at them. The 2 holding her arms were squeezing her jugs, and the one between her legs was dodging her kicks and trying to get her panties off. The young lady was very limber, and every time he let go of a leg to reach under her dress, she would pull her leg up to her chest and then kick at him. From the looks of his face, she had already connected a couple of times. Apparently, he decided enough was enough and drew back his fist to beat her into submission. I don't think the lady wants to play anymore, guys. My statement and my appearance startled them, and they stopped to stare at me. Why don't you let her go and hit the bricks before this gets nasty? You can't stop us, so stay out of this, and you can have a turn when we're done, pal, the one between her legs said. He just had to call me pal. I hate that. Do you really think I'm going to just walk off and let you guys assault her? I'm telling you guys to let her go and get out of here. If you don't, I'll have to show you that 3 doesn't go into 1 the hard way. Believe me, you won't enjoy the lesson. I was running a colossal bluff trying to con them into leaving. I'm no martial arts guru or bad street fighter, but I couldn't let these sexual deviants molest the girl. The guy was right. I probably couldn't stop them, but I had to try. The smart thing would have been to call the cops on my cell phone, except that by the time they got there, the girl would have been assaulted. I wasn't going to stand around waiting for the police. Sometimes you have to step up, even if it means getting your bum handed to you on a platter. I told them to let her go again. The 2 holding the girl's arms let go and started toward me. When they freed her arms, the girl didn't just lay there. She grabbed a double handful of hair of the guy between her legs and was trying her best to give him a Yul-Brynner haircut. He was yelling, trying to get her hands out of his hair, and calling her a witch among other choice names. The two advancing on me turned to see what the yelling was about and gave me the opening I needed. I kicked one in the groin and hit the other one with a short, right to the side of his face. He went down like he had been hit with a baseball bat. I must have caught him just right. I turned back to the first one, but my kick had put him out of commission. I'm not a small guy at 6 feet 1 and about 195 pounds, but the guy holding the girl was huge. He must have been about 6 feet 4 and better than 225 pounds. I needed an equalizer to handle him, so I grabbed the heavy metal cooking grate from one of the barbecue grills in the Ramada and advanced toward him. The big one had finally pulled the girl off him, losing a lot of hair in doing so. He had the girl by the throat and was getting ready to punch her lights out. I hit him in the back with the heavy grate, and as he turned toward me, I used the grate to hit him in the throat. His jaw was my target, but whatever works. The behemoth went down in a heap, and just to make a point, I kicked him in the family jewels. The poor victim jumped off the table, stepped over to the giant on the ground, and started kicking him in the face and head. I felt that she deserved a little payback and let her get in a few shots before I pulled her away. I released the girl and started to call the police. "Please don't call the cops. I don't want the publicity," she said. "But these a-holes tried to assault you. Don't you want them to be punished? Looks to me like they have been punished pretty good." She pointed to the 3 guys lying on the ground. 2 were unconscious, and the one I had kicked in the crotch was moaning, curled up into a fetal position. I could see her point and shrugged my shoulders. As I did, she walked over to the one that was moaning, kicked him in the head, and then did the same to the other one. "Thank you. I don't think I was going to convince them to stop. I'm Rebecca Coleman," she introduced herself. Other than a torn blouse and breathing a little hard, she seemed unfazed by what had almost happened to her. "Yeah, I know who you are. My name is Jamie O'Connor," I answered. "I know it's a lot to ask after what you just did, but could you help me get home? I'm a little shaky right now." My truck was on the other side of the campus, so we walked to the main street and caught a cab to her apartment. Rebecca Coleman wouldn't be caught dead living in a common dorm. She had an apartment in a very exclusive and expensive building. I told the driver to wait and walked her through front door as the security guard opened the entryway for us. "Thanks again, Jamie. Things could have really gone bad if you hadn't ridden in on your white horse to save me." Rebecca leaned over, kissed me on the cheek, smiled, and got on the elevator. I nodded at the guard and got back into the cab for the return trip to my dorm. Damn, I hoped I had money to pay the cab fare. When we got to my dorm, I asked the driver how much I owed him. He told me that the security guard had paid the fare, including a large tip. I guess he was used to paying for cabs for Miss Rebecca Coleman. The next morning on the way to class, I heard on the radio that 3 men had been found unconscious in a Ramada on campus. They claimed that they had been jumped by a gang of men and were victims of a random act of violence. I laughed out loud after hearing the news broadcast. They were victims of a non-random act of payback. When I got back to my dorm that night after work, there was a package on my desk. George Taylor, my roommate, said that it had been delivered around 2. I opened the package and found a bottle of very good bourbon inside. Gentleman Jack, to be exact. The note read, "I thought about sending flowers, but thought you could put this to better use. Thanks again, Rebecca." I fixed myself a drink and toasted Rebecca. It was a nice gesture, I thought, especially from Her Majesty Miss Coleman. 2 weeks went past, and one evening before I left for work, George asked me what I had gotten involved in. "What are you talking about, George?" I asked, puzzled by his question. "There is a guy going around campus asking questions about you, checking you out. He caught me between classes and asked about your background, work habits, and a bunch of other personal stuff." I clammed up and said that I didn't know much about you. "What's going on, Jamie?" I got no idea why anyone would be checking up on me. Haven't done anything wrong that I know of. Now I was puzzled and concerned. 2 days later, I saw Rebecca as I came out of my last class. That's strange. I had never seen her there before. Apparently she was waiting for me because she left the group she had been standing with and came over to meet me. "Hello, my white knight. How are you doing?" she said with a smile. "Hello, Becky. I am fine. What brings you here?" "My name is Rebecca, if you don't mind." Her smile faded a little. "If I'm a white knight and a hero, then I can call you whatever I want. I kidded her. She laughed and said, "Okay, you can call me Becky. My daddy sent this to me and asked me to deliver it to you." She handed me a business-size envelope. "What is it?" Becky just shook her head, smiled and said, "No idea. See you around, Sir Galahad." She rejoined her group and left. I was running late for work and stuck the envelope into one of my books and hurried to my job. When I got to work, my boss told me that some guy had been there checking up on me. It sounded like the same thing that George had told me about. I had no idea who this guy was or what he was after. That evening, as I tossed my books onto my desk, I saw the envelope. I opened it and pulled out a sheet of stationery. As I unfolded the letter, a smaller piece of paper fell to the floor. I picked it up and saw a check for $5,000 made out to me. The check was signed by Rebecca's father, Jason Coleman. The letter read, "Dear Mr. O'Connor, I wanted to thank you for helping Rebecca. Not many men would get involved, especially with 3 assailants. I know you didn't do it for any reason other than that it was the right thing to do, but perhaps this check will show my gratitude in a more substantial way than words. Thank you, sir, for saving Rebecca from what could have been a very serious situation. If I can be of any assistance, please don't hesitate to call me. I have included my private number. Thanks again. With gratitude and admiration, Jason Coleman." Wow, talk about conflicting emotions. I could really use the money, but I wouldn't feel right about keeping it for doing what was right. I poured a drink of the very good bourbon and thought for a few minutes. It didn't take very long and I had reached a decision. A bottle of bourbon as a thank you was one thing. Money was something else entirely. The next day was a day off for me from my night job, and after class I drove to Rebecca's apartment. It was a different security guard, and he called her apartment before he would let me up. Rebecca was waiting in her doorway when I got off the elevator. "Hello, White Knight. Are you on another quest?" She teased me. "Come on in." "No thanks, I have to get back to the books. But I am on a quest to return something." "Here," I said as I handed her the check. "Tell you father thanks, but I can't take money for what I did." Rebecca looked at me with a question, so I told her about the letter and pointed at the check from her father. I smiled, waved at her, and turned to leave. "Jamie, I didn't know Daddy was going to do that. If you won't take a thank you from him, take one from me. Let me take you to dinner night." The bottle of Gentleman Jack was enough, and thanks by the way. You don't have to spend any time with me. It's not a matter of have to, it's because I want to spend some time with you. Think you can put up with me for an evening? I hesitated for a few seconds and then nodded at her. If one of the prettiest girls at school wanted to spend an evening with me, who was I argue with her? Becky made a very quick phone call, took my arm, and we rode the elevator down. When we got to the entrance, the guard had a cab waiting for us. "Let's take a cab and leave your truck. We can concentrate on each other more that way, don't you think?" Becky suggested. Becky gave the cabbie the name of the restaurant and off we went. The place was called The Breakers. Why, I have no idea. The nearest ocean was over 800 miles away. It was a high-class, read that as expensive, seafood restaurant. Not really my kind of place for 2 reasons. One, because I'm not big on seafood, but the main reason was that I couldn't afford to eat at The Breakers. Becky, maybe we should go somewhere else? I'm not really dressed for a nice place like this," I told her. I was trying to avoid embarrassment of not being able to pay for our meal. "Don't be silly. I know the owner and we'll eat at the chef's table in the back. And don't worry about money. I asked you out, remember?" Becky looked at me with a devilish grin. She sensed my discomfort about the cost of dinner. Maybe some guys could have resisted her smile and those big brown eyes, but I wasn't one of them. I nodded, and we went around the building to the service entrance. When we walked in, the head chef smiled at Becky, gave her a hug, and led us to a table in a small room just off the kitchen. The chef's table, reserved for special customers and friends. After dinner, we took another cab back to her place. At the door to her apartment, she took my hand and led me inside. "I want to thank you properly, Jamie," Becky said. She kissed me, did a quick sexy striptease, and was soon down to just her bra and lace-trimmed boy shorts. Becky crooked her finger and motioned me over to her. I wasn't a virgin by any means. I had been something of a player during the 3 years I worked before starting college. My sex education had been more of practical hands-on type, rather than from some dull books or lectures, and I knew what went where, why, and how to get it there. But I had never had a beauty like Becky come on to me so openly. "Becky, "This isn't necessary. You don't have to do this to thank me," I said. She didn't pay any attention to my protest. My first intention was to leave, but I hesitated. I didn't want a romantic evening with Becky to be payment for doing the right thing. I felt like I had a little angel on one shoulder and a little devil on the other. Like you see in the cartoons. The angel was telling me to be honorable and leave. The devil was saying how beautiful and sexy she was and to jump her bones. Finally, it seemed like the little devil walked across my shoulders and kicked the angel in the bum and pushed it off my shoulder. I let myself be led to the sofa, and she began a lap dance that grabbed my full attention. My body had responded the moment she kissed me and went into hyperdrive with the striptease and lap dance. She felt my excitement and smiled like the cat that ate the canary. Becky took my hand, pulled me off the sofa and down the hallway to her bedroom. We entered her bedroom, and the cute lace boy shorts were tossed aside as she climbed onto her bed. Once again, Becky crooked her finger and motioned me over to her. She smiled at the look on my face and said, "Close your mouth, Jamie, unless you intend to put it to good use." The rest of the evening intensified from there. I think I held my own pretty well, but was sort of glad to see the sunrise through her bedroom window. I was totally worn out. After that marathon session, I can understand why people lose weight when they have a lot of sex. There may be no better cardiovascular workout in the world. As I was dressing, Becky said, "You can show yourself out, Jamie. I'm too tired to get up." She rolled over and was asleep before I got dressed. Apparently, Becky didn't need the after-sex cuddling or talking that most women like and want a man to get involved in. Thank God it was the one of the weekends off from my job at UPS. I was able to go home, clean up, and get some rest. About noon, I called Becky and invited her to get a pizza that evening. "You took care of dinner your way last night. Now I would like to show you how the other half lives." I teased her as I laughed. "I've got a thing this afternoon, but you can pick me up at 7 o'clock sharp. Don't be late. See you then." Becky hung up before I could agree or verify the time. That evening, I was at her building at 6:45. I wasn't anxious, but would rather wait there instead of at my place. I was waiting for 7 to go into the building and get her when I saw a red Mustang convertible stop in front of the entrance. Becky got out of the car, straightening her skirt and buttoning her blouse. She waved at the driver and bounced into the building. It appeared to me that Becky's thing that afternoon was another guy. I know I didn't have any claim on Becky, but it didn't set right with me that she would jump some guy's bones and then go out with me a few minutes later. Her appearance suggested a very hot, make-out session at best and banging like bunnies at the worst. I know I sound like a hypocrite because I was a real kitty hound earlier in my life, but I never finished with one girl and immediately the same day went out with another. In addition, I had matured a little since that time, and I guess I was looking for more than a chance for a quick bed bouncing with just any woman. The guard recognized me and let me into the building and onto the elevator. He must have called and let Becky know I was on my way up because her door was standing open. I entered the apartment and called out for Becky. She answered and told me to have a beer and grab a seat, that she was going to take a shower and would be right out. "Don't bother cleaning up. I can't take you out tonight after all," I said. I hadn't made that decision until I walked into her apartment. "We're not going out?" Becky asked as she walked out of the hallway leading to her bedroom, wearing only a large towel wrapped around her. "Becky, I'm just fooling myself here. You're different than I am, and I don't see us headed in the same direction." "I'm sorry. I did call earlier to cancel, but you didn't answer." I hadn't really called, but she didn't have to know that. I was trying to make a point here. She smiled at me and asked, "Is this the money thing again? I'm not better than you because my family's rich." "No, this isn't about money, and I didn't say better," I said different. I answered with a little force. Becky wasn't smiling anymore. "I don't understand," she said with a puzzled look. "Becky, I saw you get out of the Mustang just now. It was apparent that you and the guy had been making out. I don't know, maybe it was more. I would never rush from one date to another with just minutes to spare." "Oh, that was Roger. He's just a friend from home and dropped by to say hello. He doesn't mean anything to me, Jamie." She was smiling again, sure that she had solved my problem. "I'm not judging you, Becky, but that's what I meant about us being different. You don't see a problem with going at it hot and heavy with someone even if he doesn't mean anything to you, and then going on a date with another guy a few minutes later. Look, Becky, I don't have the right to tell you who to see or be with or what to do, but but I do have the right to decide if I want to be a part of that lifestyle, and I don't. I watched Becky, and I don't think she really understood why I was upset. You said you wanted to thank me for my help. Well, you've done that better than anything I could have imagined. The bourbon, the great dinner, and then the evening with you were all wonderful. So your debt is paid, and thanks for a great evening. I hope to see you around sometime. I left her apartment and rode the elevator down. The security guard was there and told me that Miss Coleman would like for me to wait for her. I smiled, shook my head, and kept walking toward the front door. I'm sorry, sir, but I've been instructed to detain you until Miss Coleman can get here, the guard said as he walked to intercept me. You will really be sorry if you try to stop me, buddy. Believe me, they don't pay you enough for that. I must have made my point because he stepped aside. The pizza joint was packed, and I joined some friends for the evening. The next day I did routine things like laundry, apartment cleaning, and getting a head start on some of my classes for next week. I didn't think about Becky more than once or twice an hour. Finally, I laughed at myself and put her out of my mind. It was an amazing interlude in my life, but it was just one night. 3 days later, Becky was waiting for me as I came out of my last class of the day. She was sitting on a bench outside the lecture hall and stood up when she saw me. I was surprised to see her, but never once thought she was waiting for me. Becky intercepted me as I was walking away. I don't think Becky was used to people, especially men, not doing what she wanted. She had to reach out and take my arm to get me to stop. Hey, wait up, she said. Did I piss you off so much that you won't even talk to me? Can I talk to you about Saturday? I laughed a little and responded, I'm not mad at you. I just don't see the point in talking. Your lifestyle isn't something I want to be involved in, so why waste time talking about it? That's sort of a provincial way of looking at things, don't you think? Don't know about that, but it's the way I feel, I answered with feeling. You apparently think of sex as a recreational sport and I don't. Maybe it's because I'm a little older and I've gone through that phase in my life, but I want making love to mean more than just horizontal exercise. I sure sound like some Bible-thumping preacher, I thought. My, aren't you the prude all of a sudden? Becky was insulted. I could hear it in her voice. You didn't seem to mind my lifestyle Friday night. Now did you? I'm sorry. I know I sound like a sanctimonious jerk. I don't mean to criticize you. It's your choice on how you live your life. There is nothing wrong with you or your lifestyle. It's just wrong for me. I gave her a little hug and started to walk away. I had to get to work. Maybe we could have a little fun? Becky had stepped in front of me. Why this sudden interest in me? I know we had a good time Friday, but according to what you said, it was not that big of a deal to you. So why this full court press? I enjoyed our night together, but more than that, you're a good person. I haven't been involved with too many good people lately and thought you and I could spend some time together. You were more concerned with my pleasure than yours. That was something new, believe me. I thought for a few seconds and answered, thanks for the compliment, but I think I'll pass. See you around, Becky. For the rest of my senior year, Becky would smile and wave at me when I saw her around the campus. She called a few times, not begging, but just wanting to know if I had changed my mind. I hadn't. I heard through the college grapevine that she was still living the free lifestyle and was dating several different men. I graduated in the top 5% of my class with a double major in computer science and system analysis. A medium-sized manufacturing firm offered me a position and I jumped at it. It was strange not to have to run to a night job like I had done all through college. 2 years later, a headhunter contacted me with a job offer with JCL Enterprises, another big manufacturing company. The salary was almost twice what I was making and included some very nice perks. A company car, country club membership, and stock options were just a few of the extras. I owed it to myself to take the interview with the company just to check it out. I had an interview with the HR manager, a vice president of sales, and the IT department head. We discussed the building and revamping of a website, internet marketing, and other general IT aspects to the business. It was a strange interview and the questions were general and not very probing. I felt that the three men were stalling and waiting for something. Oh, the job offer was real, and we did discuss the duties and area of responsibility for the position, but something wasn't quite right. The door to the office opened behind me, and the three men stood up to greet whoever came in. I also stood, turned, and got a surprise. The man joining us was Jason Coleman, Rebecca's father. I recognized him from the pictures in her apartment and the stories in the financial section of the paper. The stalling tactics were explained. The three had been waiting on Mr. Coleman. "Hello, Jamie. I understand you prefer that to James. It's nice to finally meet you." Mr. Coleman shook my hand and motioned for me to sit back down. Turning to the three men, he asked, "Well, how does he stack up? Can we put him to use, and will he be an asset for us?" All three nodded their heads, or verbally indicated that I was the real deal. "What do you say, Jamie? Would you like to join us and bring our IT department into the 21st century?" Until Mr. Coleman walked in, I had decided to take the job. His presence put that decision on hold for the moment. "I'm not sure, Mr. Coleman." He seemed surprised and asked, "The starting salary and perks are quite generous, but I guess we could negotiate on those." "It's not that, Mr. Coleman. I wonder if this offer isn't because of what I did for Rebecca. Jamie, I won't lie to you. Even though that incident was 3 years ago, that's part of my interest in you, but only because it showed that you were a young man with character and good morals. I admired your actions in saving her from those men, and the fact that you stood by your convictions concerning her wild life. Yeah, I know all about you breaking up with Rebecca because of her lifestyle." He smiled at me, offered me a cup of coffee, and continued, "Let me assure you that even though I am grateful and admire you, gratitude only goes so far. I'm always on the lookout for good people that can be an asset to my company. That's why I have scouts always looking for additions to my business. When my people came up with your name and explained the great job you had been doing, I already knew about your character, so I had them offer you this position. This is strictly a business proposition. Nothing else is involved. So do you want the job?" I looked at Mr. Coleman, trying to gauge his sincerity. "It's a great offer, Mr. Coleman, but I would like to think about it for a day or two, if that's all right," I told him. "Jamie, you can have until tomorrow noon. The assistant director of our IT department is going to England in 3 months to manage the IT department in that branch, and we have to get on the stick to get someone in here to replace him. You're my first choice, but there are other candidates also, and we can't afford to wait too long." "Okay." I nodded, shook hands all around, and left the office. When I left my current office for the interview, I had made arrangements to take off the rest of the day. I grabbed some lunch and went to my condo to think about the job offer. As I had told Mr. Coleman, the offer was a great opportunity for anyone, but especially someone my age. Sitting on the balcony with my first and last gentleman jack of the day, I thought about the offer. The only drawback that I could see was that the position may have been offered to me because of Mr. Coleman's gratitude over the incident in college. But Mr. Coleman denied that was the reason. After about 20 minutes, I realized that no matter why I got the job, I would do well and be an asset to the company. I may get the job because of Mr. Coleman's regard for me, but I would keep it because I could do the work. "Take the job, dummy," I told myself. I called the HR manager the first thing the next morning and accepted the position, but told him I would have to give a month's notice to my current employer. There was a project winding down, and I didn't want to leave them in a bind. He understood and told me to report to him in 30 days. In the meantime, he said he would send over some documentation on their systems so I could hit the ground running when I reported in. For 18 months, I did exactly what Mr. Coleman had asked in my interview. I brought the company's IT department into the 21st century. The head of the IT department, Bill Myers, was more a sales-orientated type, and running the department was pretty much left up to me. I was the fair-haired boy and had received a couple of large bonuses and received another perk for my work. The company provided me with a large suite in a concierge-type hotel. The apartment had 2 master bedrooms separated by a large area that consisted of a living room, dining room, and a galley-type kitchen. It came with all the amenities. All I had to do was sleep, eat, and leave for work. The hotel provided maid service, laundry service, and just about any other service I could think of as part of the package. I could even leave a menu with the main desk, and dinner would be ready at whatever time I told them. It was a great way to live. I wasn't dating very much, maybe going out for pizza and beer once in a while. I used my spare time to develop a program for purchasing and inventory control. It was designed for a small business, and my company had no interest in the software. One small addition to my contract that I had asked for stated that any programs I designed that weren't wanted by my employer were mine to sell. I got the okay and clearance from Bill Myers and licensed the program out, receiving a large initial dollar contract plus royalties from future sales. I had missed my first company Christmas party because I was working after hours on my program. This year it was suggested by higher-ups that I make it a point to attend. Actually, it was more of an order than a suggestion. The company's Christmas party by invitation only was held at one of the finest hotels in the city with no expense spared. My invitation read, Mr. James O'Connor and guest. I wasn't dating anyone. I had been concentrating on my job and on my inventory program, so I went alone. My plan was to put in an appearance, stay long enough to satisfy the powers to be, and then join a couple of friends at a neighborhood tavern. There was a buffet that would have done justice to any five-star restaurant, and at least 5 free bars scattered around the ballroom. The seating arrangements were a little unusual. Each table had assigned seating with representatives from each of the major departments of the company required to sit together. Randy Smith-Jones, the head of HR, explained to me that this arrangement was conducive to a better understanding between departments of their needs and requirements. It was a good idea because a person was a little more receptive to others' problems if they had partied together. You have to hand it to Mr. Coleman. Even at a party, he was trying to improve his company. The executive table was no exception. Mr. Coleman and the head of the departments were seated together. For some reason, my presence was requested at that table. Actually, it wasn't a request. Again, it was an order. I wasn't a department head, but I was told, "You will sit here, Mr. O'Connor." My fellow table mates were Randy, the head of the HR department, Jillian Grisham, head of sales and marketing, Rob Johnson, head of production, and Mr. Coleman himself. The 2 men department heads were accompanied by their spouses. Jillian's guest was Mel, her current live-in boyfriend. Mr. Coleman, Jason at least for the party, had a young lady that had to be about half his age as his guest. Her name was Cindy, and after 10 minutes you understood that she was a trophy and nothing more. I never learned what had happened to Rebecca's mother. There was a rumor about her and a personal trainer, but I didn't have the nerve or the interest to ask for more information. There were 9 people at our table and 1 empty chair. I felt out of place because I didn't have the +1 that the invitation allowed. But it didn't really matter because I planned on ducking out ASAP. About 30 minutes after everyone sat down, the empty chair was filled. Rebecca swept in and sat down next to me, smiling at the surprised look on my face. "Hi, Jamie. It's good to see you. How have you been?" She talked as if we had parted as the best of friends. I nodded, said hello, and looked at Mr. Coleman as if to say, "What the hell?" Rebecca has crossed my mind once in a while in the 3 years plus since college. Every time I saw Mr. Coleman, I had to think of Rebecca and our short time together. I wasn't carrying a torch for her, but considering my lack of female companionship, recently I did think about the one fantastic evening we shared and had played a little "what if?" in my head. Now here she was, sitting next to me. Rebecca hadn't changed very much. If anything, she was even more beautiful than before. Her blonde hair was now in a pixie cut rather than worn down her back. From what I could see, and the dress she was wearing let me see a lot. Her body was even firmer and more toned than it had been in college. The dress was maroon, mid-thigh, low cut in the front and back. Not slutty, but a blind man would have watched her walk across the room. "I didn't know you came to these company things, Rebecca." "Normally I don't." I must have looked puzzled, so she continued, "I was another party at the hotel across the street. That's why I'm dressed up, and Daddy called and asked me to come over. I wasn't going to until he told me why he wanted me here." "And why did he want you here?" I was puzzled. He said that one of his rising stars came to the party alone and need a companion for the evening, Rebecca answered with a small smile. "Is that something you do a lot? Be a stand-in date, I mean?" I've never done it before and wasn't going to this time until he told me who my date would be. Again she was smiling, but bigger this time. "Okay, I'll bite. Who is this guy that gets the pleasure of your company?" I felt sorry for the poor guy, because Rebecca looked amazing. He was going to look at, dance with, and spend the evening with someone he would never have a chance of being anything more than a one-time date, and only as a favor to her father. It would be torture by temptation. For a rising star in the company, you can be pretty dense sometimes, Rebecca replied, again with that smile. "Huh. That was my brilliant response. You're the rising star, Jamie. Daddy said he wanted you to have a fun evening. If you sat at the table all evening watching and listening to the other couples, you wouldn't have any fun." Ergo Rebecca to the rescue. "Enough talk, let's dance," Rebecca said. "Gobsmacked is what our English friends call it." It means you're so amazed or surprised at something that your mouth opens and closes involuntarily. That was me, gobsmacked. Why would Mr. Coleman care if I didn't have a date, and why would he draft his daughter to remedy the situation? The band was playing a set of only slow songs which allowed Rebecca and me to talk and get caught up to date on our lives since college. I found out that she had went to Europe for 2 years after graduation and then came back and was now working at a subsidiary of father's company. She had just moved back to the main office here in town a couple of months ago. Rebecca told me that she didn't even know I was working for her father until he called and asked for her help that evening. Buried in the IT department like I was, and she being with an autonomous branch of the company, our paths hadn't crossed. I told my tale of working at another company for 2 years and how the headhunter found and recruited me. She smiled when I told her I almost didn't take the job because of my concerns as to her father's motives for hiring me. Only my white knight would worry about why instead of how much. You're still Sir Galahad, aren't you? I don't know about that, but I still have the same convictions as I did in college. Some things you never outgrow, I guess, I answered. Maybe, but there are some things you do outgrow or think about differently, Rebecca replied. For some reason, I thought about her lifestyle in college. Who am I kidding? The reason I thought about her attitude towards sex was her body plastered against me as we danced. It seems the little head was willing to forgive and forget anything to get its way. It showed its willingness by getting hard as Rebecca rubbed against me. My only defense is that because of my workload, I had been celibate for over 4 months. I see that there are some things that don't change, Rebecca said with a smile when she felt my arousal. Sorry, I said as I pulled back from her a little. It's been a long time since I danced with a beautiful woman and my body forgot its manners. Rebecca pulled me back tight against her and said, I like you manners just fine. Quit thinking and dance with me. The rest of the evening was sort of a blur to me. I remember sitting at the table socializing with the other people, although I don't remember what we talked about, the company and business, I guess. But what I remember best was the dances with Rebecca and her laughing at the effect she had on me. She wasn't being cruel or sadistic. She said she was flattered and was laughing with me. Funny, I didn't find the humor in the whole thing. My plan to leave early went down the drain. I stayed until the last dance with Rebecca was over. Going back to our table, I saw that over half of the guests had already left. I offered Rebecca a ride home, but she said her car was in the garage across the street. She pulled a card out of her clutch, wrote something on the back, and handed it to me. The front has my office number, and I wrote my cell number on the back. Give me a call, Jamie. I would like to continue the discussion we had tonight, she said. She gave me a full body hug, kissed my cheek, and waved goodbye with an evil little grin. I wasn't sure if she was referring to our business discussion or about what happened on the dance floor. The next day was Saturday, and for the first time in a while, I wasn't working on anything that weekend. I decided to go shoot some hoops in the park across from my apartment. I needed to work out the alcohol from the previous night. I had the court to myself, so as I shot jumpers, I had a chance to think about the dance and Rebecca. I wondered if I should call her or just let it go. Rebecca was a beautiful, sexy, delightful companion, and I thought of how she looked and acted on our one night together back in college. A repeat of that night in her apartment wouldn't be such a bad thing, I thought. Just as long as I understood that's all it would be. A carefree sexual romp with a beautiful woman, I warned myself. Problem was that I really liked Rebecca and had since I helped her that night at college. Her courage in fighting the 3 men had impressed me. She was intelligent, witty, and fun to be with, and I'm afraid I would want more than just a romp with her. My thoughts hadn't changed concerning relationships. Sex had to be more than an energetic way of shaking hands. I know, not normal thinking for most men, but it was the way I felt. Finally, as I sank a long 3-pointer, I decided to let things slide. I had been okay without Rebecca in my life for more than 3 years, and there was no need to change that now, I thought to myself. However, I hadn't counted on Rebecca. 2 weeks after New Year's, Rebecca called me at my office on a Monday. She needed an escort to her company's dinner or award dinner that weekend. I hesitated and she said, "No big deal, Jamie, but I could use your help here. I have to go to this damn thing, and if I go alone, I'll be the target for every single guy there. Some of the married ones too. It'll be like waving a red flag in front of a bunch of bulls. It's bad enough that I have to go to this stuffy doings, but I can do without being red meat for the wolves." Well, I don't. I began before she cut me off. Come on, Jamie, be a buddy. Do one more good deed, Sir White Knight. Please. Rebecca took her last shot and scored. Okay, but just to help you out here, I answered. She suggested that she pick me up, saying that she lived on one side of the city and the dance was on the other side with me in the middle. I agreed and started to give her my address. She informed me that she knew where I lived and would be there at 7 p.m. on Saturday. That Saturday evening at 6:45, the front desk called to let me know that I had a guest on the way up. For some reason, I was running a little behind, so I opened the door to my suite and went to my bedroom to finish dressing. I was putting the final touches on my tie when I heard Rebecca call my name. I told her to come in, and as I walked out of my bedroom, slipping on my tuxedo jacket, got my first look at her. If she had been beautiful and sexy at the Christmas party, she was stunning and sultry now. Rebecca had on a mid-thigh, red sequined dress that shimmered and sparkled every time she moved. It was cut in a deep V in front, which left no doubt that she was the female of the species. Damn, Becky, no wonder you need a night protector. That dress would make a dead man sit up, I said by way of greeting. Becky, huh? I haven't been called that in a long time, Rebecca answered. It's nice to hear it again. Thanks for the compliment. She said that we should go, and as we stepped out of the elevator, she handed me her car keys, suggesting that I drive. The valet had left her car parked in front of the hotel. I almost stumbled when I saw it. Sitting at the curb was a Maserati Gran Turismo. The car cost as much as my yearly salary with bonuses. Like it? Daddy gave it to me at Christmas. I think it was a bribe to stay away from his house during the holidays so he and that Cindy could jump each other's bones uninterrupted, she said with a big smile. I could only nod and lead her to the car. The valet had the passenger door open and got a good look at her legs as she got in. Jumping in the driver's side, I took off, peeling rubber because of the car's tremendous power. I could learn to like this, I thought. Maybe I'll get one next year. The dinner dance was about what you would expect. Boring speeches when the awards were handed out, an okay buffet, but it did have a good choice of alcohol and plenty of it. The band was actually pretty good and played a nice mix of music. Watching the men watch Rebecca in that dress was entertaining, to say the least. They would sneak looks at her as she sat, as she walked from table to table greeting coworkers, and when she danced, especially when she danced, Rebecca still moved with a sensual grace that attracted attention, and lots of it. More than one man got an elbow in the ribs from their wives, girlfriends, or dates. It was more interesting than reality TV. Rebecca apparently wanted to make sure the bartenders at each of the 3 bars in the ballroom were doing a good job. She taste-tested vodka martinis from each one, and then retested each one several times. I guess they were doing a good job because I never heard her complain. We sat through dinner, the awards, and about an hour of dancing. Our last dance was more of me holding her up than moving to the music. It was time for Cinderella to leave the ball, I decided. With an assist from the valet, I got Rebecca into the car and began the trip home. Now what? I thought. Should I take her home and get a cab back to my place? She was still alert enough to tell me to take her to my apartment, feed her some coffee, and then she could get home. I didn't think there was enough coffee in the city to sober her up, but I followed her directions. I had the valet park her car and took her up to my apartment. Once inside, she made a beeline for the bathroom. 10 minutes later, that's where I found her. Apparently, she had started to splash water on her face, sat down on the toilet, and passed out. The water was still running into the sink. I gathered her up into my arms and took her into the guest bedroom and laid her on the bed. Now the question was, should I undress her or just throw a blanket over her? Because of the way her dress was cut in the front, there was no doubt that she was braless. Because of the way she got into the car and the way she sat a few times at the dance, I knew she had on little red lace panties and thigh-high stockings and nothing else. If I undressed her, she would be all but nude, and with all the rubbing together as we danced that night and the alcohol I had consumed, I wasn't sure that I could or would do the right thing. I covered her with a light blanket and went to my bedroom, avoiding the temptation. I woke up as someone sat on the side of my bed. Glancing at the clock, it read 9:30 a.m. Rebecca was sitting beside me, smiled when I opened my eyes, and leaned over to give me a kiss. "I'll have your clothes cleaned and returned to you," she said. "Thanks for going with me last night, Jamie, and thanks for taking care of me afterward." She left my bedroom carrying her dress and thigh highs, and she was wearing one of my t-shirts, a pair of my sweats cinched around her waist, and her high heels. Not the most fashionable look, but sexy anyway. By the time I was out of bed, she had already gone, but there was fresh coffee, that life-saving liquid, in the kitchen. On Tuesday, I received a package at my office containing my t-shirt and sweats, cleaned and pressed. The package was addressed to Sir White Knight with a note simply reading, "Thanks again. White Knight my arse," I thought. One more drink that night and Rebecca wouldn't have slept alone. Some knight in shining armor. I didn't talk to or see Rebecca for 3 weeks. She called and again asked for my company at a charity auction. Rebecca used the same reasoning as before. She didn't want to be food for the predators at the shindig. It didn't take much convincing to get me to go. Let's face it, spending the evening talking to, dancing with, and entertaining a beautiful woman beat the hell of whatever was in second place. The evening was almost a repeat of the dinner dance. Rebecca again was stunning. Men again watched her and got punched by their partners for doing so. And she again tempted me like hell when we danced. The major difference was she drank mineral water all night after 1 glass of wine. I watched my intake of alcohol too. After the last time, I wanted my wits about me. As we pulled up the driveway to the front door of my hotel, Rebecca said, "Thanks, Jamie. You were a lifesaver. Good night." She got behind the wheel of the Maserati and drove off. No kiss, no hug, no nothing. I must be losing my touch, I thought. This time it was only 2 weeks before Rebecca called with another invitation. This time it was an art exhibit that she had been instrumental in obtaining for some gallery. Same excuse, too many wolves for her to go alone. Hell, I'm easy, I thought, and agreed to go. Rebecca was more than beautiful again, in another fantastic dress. She had a little more to drink this time, but was careful to limit her alcohol intake. I did too. There was no dancing this time, but we spent most of the evening holding hands, or with Rebecca holding onto my arm. After the exhibit, when we got back to my place, she said she would really like that cup of coffee she didn't get the first time. In the elevator, I picked up the phone, called room service, and ordered coffee. I could have made it, but the coffee from the hotel was much better and would be delivered almost before mine would be done. That's one of the nice things about a concierge hotel. I invited Rebecca to have a seat and excused myself to hang up my suit coat and get rid of my tie. Rebecca then went to freshen up, and by the time she got back, the coffee had been delivered. She came back into the living room wearing the same t-shirt and sweats that she had borrowed before. "Hope you don't mind. I'll have them cleaned and sent back to you again," she said. After pouring coffee for both of us, I sat down across from her and asked, "Okay, Becky, what's going on?" She smiled at me calling her Becky, but just shook her head and looked puzzled at the question. "You've made a point of using me to squire you around on these special evenings, and I want to know why," I explained. She started to respond and I said, "The truth, please, Becky." Rebecca took a few seconds as if to gather herself and asked, "Remember at the Christmas party I said that there were some things that you grew out of or felt differently about? I was talking about my lifestyle back in college and for a time after graduation. I don't live like that anymore." "That still doesn't explain these evenings together," I reminded her. "I didn't know how much I missed you until Daddy called and asked me to be your date for the evening. When I saw you, it brought back all the old feelings I had for you." She giggled and continued, "Do you know that I followed you around campus for over 6 months? I thought that if you kept seeing me, you would change your mind about me, about us." "What feelings? We had one night together. A great night, but just one night. And with your cavalier attitude about sex, even that couldn't have been all that special. You don't give yourself enough credit, Jamie. You made quite an impression on me, and it isn't easy to impress the Princess Coleman. Do you know why?" I shook my head no, and she continued, "When you attacked those 3 guys that night, you didn't do it because I had money. You did it to help a young woman in trouble. I didn't know it was you until it was over," I explained. "Yeah, but you knew afterwards. You knew when you turned down that check Daddy sent you. You could have parlayed my rescue into a very nice life, but you didn't. All you saw was a girl that you liked. You didn't see $signs. That's why I quickly developed, if not a love, at least an intense like for you. And then my lifestyle screwed it up. So what do you want, Becky? What do you see happening here?" I asked. "I want us to spend time together or see each other or date. Whatever you want to call it. We could start as friends hanging out and see if anything more develops. If it doesn't, then we've had some fun together as friends. But if something grows from our time together, just think how great that could be." Rebecca stopped as if to catch her breath. I think she was trying to see how I was taking the things. So what do you say, Sir Knight? Feel like saving the damsel again? She waited expectantly for my answer. I looked at Rebecca for a few seconds and said, let's see if I've got this right. My duties would include hanging out with a beautiful woman? Rebecca smiled and nodded yes. I would probably have to drive her Maserati once in a while, wouldn't I? Another nod. I would have to take the chance that we might become more than friends, wouldn't I? She nodded again, this time with a big smile. I just have one more question, Lady Becky. I paused for a couple of seconds and asked with a big grin, when do I start? Rebecca got up, come over to my chair, climbed onto my lap and said, how about tonight, Sir Knight? I held her, or rather we held each other for several minutes, occasionally talking but mostly just holding each other. Becky got up, pulled me over to the couch so we could sit together and poured fresh coffee. She never did leave that evening, and no, we didn't jump into bed together. She slept in my guest room. The next day I drove her home in that great car of hers where she changed into jeans and sneakers but continued to wear my t-shirt, and we went on a picnic. I had my hotel put together a picnic basket with goodies, and we drove out to a nearby lake. It was still too early in the year to swim, but we enjoyed being beside the sparkling water. For the next month, we would go out during the week a couple of times. No big shindigs or parties, just two close friends enjoying some of the small restaurants in the city. We would find a little mom and pop pizza place or a neighborhood eatery and give them a try. On the weekends, the dates would be more upscale, including art exhibits, charity affairs, and even the opera. I didn't care for opera, but Becky loved it, so I went along, like a good friend should. There were a couple of times that one of us would sleep over, but that's all it was. There was no sex involved. I realized that my feelings for Becky were more than just remembering that one fabulous night we had in college. She was fun to be around. We could talk about almost anything, and she was maybe the most beautiful woman I had ever seen, much less spent time with. I was falling in love, but still had some reservations about her previous lifestyle. There had to be a reason that Rebecca changed her lifestyle. I didn't think she woke up one morning and said to herself, I think I'm going to change the way I live. So I decided that a quiet recon mission was called for. I contacted a friend, George Taylor, in the IT department of JRC, the division of JC Well that Rebecca worked for. George was a friend from my college days and owed me a favor or two. George and I had worked on 2 or 3 projects together during school, and he was my roommate. We had gone our separate ways after graduation. George and I ran into each other at Angelo's, my favorite pizza joint, one evening and reconnected. We would get together for a beer once a month or so and talk shop. I learned that he was working for a competitor and that he wasn't happy there. He said that the IT director was the owner's nephew, and other than playing video games, didn't know anything about computers or networks. I told Randy Smith-Jones, the head of HR, and Bill Myers, my boss, about George and his dissatisfaction with his job. Explaining who he was and how I knew him, I suggested that he would be just the guy for the open IT position at JRC. This was before Rebecca came to work for JRC. They asked him to come in for an interview and offered him a job that same day. George didn't get the job because of me. He got it on his own merits. I simply gave my guys a heads up on him. He didn't see it that way. George was grateful and thought I could walk on water. I had always believed that you should use all your resources to solve a problem. I had a problem, and George was a resource that I could use. After the usual "how are you" and "what's been going on," I asked George for a favor. He said anything I needed, and I explained what I wanted him to do. I told him to find out any gossip or talk about Rebecca that was running around JRC. You sly old dog, trying to get next to the boss's daughter again. Huh? George said. Already got next to her, I said, and explained that Rebecca and I had dated some. Before I get too invested in her, I want to know if what I see is what I get, or is there something more to the girl that I should know about? I don't want to get burned again, if you know what I mean. George knew about my little fling with Rebecca in college and why it ended so abruptly. I got your back, Jamie. I'll get back to you in a few days. Do on the cutie, George. I don't want Rebecca to know about this, I requested. It was 10 days later that George called and suggested we meet for beer and pizza. I joined him at Angelo's, and after getting a pitcher of beer, he gave me his report. JRC is like a little Peyton place, and if the people there worked as much as they gossip, the company would be a lot better off. I found out that Rebecca is very standoffish with all the men in the company. She refuses to go out with any of them. In fact, there was one guy that wouldn't take no for an answer and kept bugging her to go out with him and paid for it with his job. George stopped to chuckle for a few seconds. The story goes that the next time this hole started pressuring her to go out with him, she told him she would be right back. When she returned, she had another woman with her. It was her supervisor, but the guy didn't know it. Rebecca asked the guy why he kept bothering her, and he smiled and said he was trying to wear her down. George stopped to see if he had my complete attention. So what happened? What did she do? This was getting good, I thought. Rebecca lit into the guy. From what I heard, I don't think the guy could sit down because of the arse chewing she gave him. After a couple of minutes, she told him that if he bothered her again, she would file a sexual harassment suit against him. The guy crawled away, not realizing that he had just lost his job. Lost his job? Did she file the suit? No, even better. Rebecca's supervisor reported it to the department head, who reported it to his boss, who reported it up the ladder. No one but upper management knows that Rebecca is Old Man Coleman's daughter. When the big boys heard about it, they took action. The guy was called into the office, and it was suggested that he might be happier working somewhere else. He was gone that afternoon. George sat back and poured us some more beer. Now all of the other men in the department are afraid to ask her out because they want to keep their jobs. They call her the Ice Princess and stay away from her. Thanks, George, you done good, buddy, I told him. On the way home, I felt really good. Apparently Rebecca was telling the truth about changing her lifestyle. Maybe it was time to take this relationship past the friends hanging out stage. I was sure Rebecca felt the same way. Before I did, I wanted to know the real reason why Rebecca changed her ways. The next Saturday, Rebecca and I went to a fundraiser given by a charity that she was involved in. It was a relatively early night, and we were back at my place by 11 p.m. We had coffee delivered and were sitting on the couch when I began my quest for information. Becky, these last few weeks have been great. She agreed, and I waited a little, trying to decide how to say what I wanted to. Finally, I said, we've been good friends, and I would like to see if we can be more than that. What I'm trying to say is I think I'm falling in love with you. I'm so glad, Jamie, because I feel the same way, she responded. I want to. I interrupted her by saying, there is something I would like to know, if you'll tell me. I mean, before we get any closer. She nodded for me to continue. You said you had grown out of the wild child lifestyle, but was there some reason that you changed your mind? Rebecca's smile left her face and she tensed up and sighed. Yes, there was a reason. Something happened while I was in Europe. Are you sure you want to hear this? You may not like me anymore when you do. If you don't want to tell me, it's okay. Maybe it's really none of my business, but I remember what happened in college and it worries me. I want to love you, Becky, but the way you used to be scares me. She looked into my eyes and apparently saw what she wanted and said, I was assaulted. Well, maybe sexually assaulted is the term. I don't know. It was in Italy, and I was with a man in his apartment. We had just finished making love when his two roommates came into the bedroom and jumped on me too. I didn't mind the first man, but the other two basically assaulted me. Rebecca stopped and got a shot of whiskey to put into her coffee. I fought and struggled, but I couldn't get away. After the two roommates got finished, my date used me again, and then the other two came back for more. I was always smart enough to make my sexual partners use condoms, but these two didn't, and neither did the other guy after the first time. I must have passed out because I woke up on a park bench. She was crying, so I pulled her into my arms and held her. After a minute or two, Rebecca sat back up and continued her story. Thank God I was on the pill, but I took a morning after pill anyway. Between the two of them, they prevented a pregnancy. But they couldn't prevent an STD, 3 different ones in fact. God, I hope their tools fell off, those scumsuckers. Rebecca shook her head and almost chuckled. So here was Princess Coleman in a bad situation. Daddy had always turned his head at my wildness. As long as I didn't embarrass him, he paid the bills and stayed out of my life. My mother had an affair with her personal trainer, and Daddy kicked her to the curb. I guess by letting me run wild, he was trying to make up for throwing her out. But if my medical problems and the reason for them became public knowledge, I could lose my free ride. What did you do? How did you keep it quiet? Having money is a good thing in this situation because my girlfriend helped me find a doctor that would treat me and then misplace his records. His services were quite costly comparatively speaking, but well worth it. I came back home, and continued treatment with my own doctor. He rationalized that since my sexual partners were in a different country, there was no need to report my STDs to the local authorities. I refilled our coffee cups and again added a shot of whiskey. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, and I'm sorry I asked you about it. I didn't mean to hurt you, Becky." She nodded, hugged me, and said, "Well, that's the reason my life changed." Hell, if those other two had been more romantic and asked me, I might have agreed to do them too. Hopefully I wouldn't have, but I was really nuts back then. At first I blamed them for what happened, but came to realize that if I hadn't have put myself in that position, it couldn't have happened. It was my fault for being so nutty. Rebecca stopped talking and hung her head. Her shoulders were shaking as she cried again. Pulling her back into my arms seemed to help, and she got control again. Her story had taken the better part of an hour to tell. An hour full of sadness, crying, remorse, and anger. She pulled herself together and went to the bathroom. When she returned, she looked me in the eye. "Now you know my sad little tale. So where do we go from here, Jamie?" I looked at her beautiful face, tear-streaked and without makeup. She wasn't guilty of anything but bad judgment. Those three a-holes were responsible for their actions, not her. I knew that it really didn't matter to me, other than being pissed off at the assault. The important thing was how she lived now. "I don't plan on going anywhere, at least not tonight," I said with a smile. "Why don't you take a shower and join me in my bedroom? I don't mean for sex. You need to be held, so let's just snuggle all night. Your white knight will make it all better, Becky, I promise." She gave a little laugh, kissed me, and ran to the bathroom. I heard the shower start, went to get a t-shirt and that same pair of sweats she had used before and put them in the bathroom for her. As I opened the door far enough to lay the cloths on the counter, I saw her silhouette through the frosted shower door. I hope I can keep my word and only snuggle tonight, I thought. Rebecca came back to the living room, dressed in my cloths and drying her short hair. She had no makeup on and her hair was all tousled. She looked like a fresh-faced young girl of 16 instead of a sophisticated young woman of 25. She had never looked more appealing. We went to my bedroom and got into bed and fell asleep spooning. I normally sleep nude, but I put on a t-shirt and sleeper bottoms. There was no need to tempt fate. This was a night for therapy and comfort for Rebecca, not a sexual romp for me. Early the next morning, I woke up with Rebecca kissing my neck, nibbling on my earlobe, and with her hand down my sleeper bottoms. So much for therapy and comfort, I thought as I came fully awake. The rest of the day was pretty much an instant replay of that night in college years ago. We didn't leave the bed except to shower and get something to eat. I think we answered the question that Rebecca had asked last night about where we were going from here. I had told Rebecca that I was falling in love with her, but that wasn't the truth. The truth was that I was already in love with her. After her story the previous night, I felt there was no reason to be on my guard anymore. Sunday evening, after an early dinner, Rebecca went back to her apartment. We made plans for dinner on Tuesday evening and kissed goodbye. All day Monday, I wasn't worth much. I kept thinking about Rebecca, our evening and the next day together. I must have been smiling a lot because a couple of people asked me what was so funny. Monday evening, as I walked through the lobby, I nodded and waved at Jacob, the concierge. It was a prearranged signal. He would pick up the phone and order coffee and a few snacks for me. The serving tray would have a menu of what room service had readily available for dinner, although I could order almost anything I wanted. Jacob smiled and nodded back, but didn't pick up the phone. I found out why when I got to my suite. Rebecca was there and had already ordered dinner for us. When I walked in my door, she greeted me with a smile, a kiss, and 2 fingers of gentleman Jack over ice. It sure beat the hell out of walking into an empty apartment. I hope I'm not being too pushy, Jamie, but I didn't want to wait until tomorrow to see you. Do you mind? She asked with the evil little grin of hers. I've already ordered dinner. It should be here in 20 minutes. Why don't you jump in the shower and relax for a little? Smiling, I went into my bedroom thinking, I could get used to this. When I came of the bathroom drying myself, Rebecca was lying across my bed wearing a smile, a ribbon around her neck, and not much more. Food's here. Do you want to eat right away, or can I persuade you to wait until later? You couldn't have pulled me out of that bedroom with a John Deere tractor. The salad was wilted. The steaks was cold, as were the baked potatoes by the time we got to them, but that's what microwaves are for. We ate dinner with Rebecca sitting on my lap, wearing nothing but a t-shirt. I don't remember if the food was any good or not. We made a quantum leap from being friends to being lovers and in love. For the next month and a half, we were together almost all the time. Rebecca and I learned more about each other, our likes and dislikes, what things we like to do, and our philosophy on life. I know it's heavy stuff, but important if a relationship is going to succeed. Rebecca surprisingly liked the outdoors. Camping and hiking were a good time to her. She liked sports but loved football. She would rather get a root canal than watch the political bullshit called the Olympics, and thought crushing a golf shot was the ultimate joy. Who knew? The Princess Coleman was really just a down-home country girl. Well, almost anyway. Other than her previous wild child philosophy, we fit pretty well on many other things too. On our trips to hike or camp, we discussed everything from politics, we're both moderate conservatives, to our favorite authors and movies. One of the most important things we agreed on was that we both wanted to have children someday. I surprised her early one Saturday morning, waking her up by knocking on her door. Rebecca answered the door and saw two rather large men and me. "Jamie, what are you doing here, and who are these gentlemen?" "This is Ron and Jerry. They work on the loading dock at JCOL and have generously offered to help," I answered. "Help with what?" Now I really had her puzzled. We've been together almost constantly for the last 6 weeks or so, and I'm getting tired of running back and forth between our apartments. I told her with a grin. "I thought between the four of us, we could get you moved into my apartment today." "What did you say, Becky? Care to move in with your white knight?" All at once I had an armful of woman. Rebecca jumped on me, putting her arms around my neck and wrapping her legs around my waist. "Yes, yes, yes," she yelled as she kissed me several times. Ron and Jerry were smiling, and I finally got Rebecca back on her feet. It took all day, but we got her packed and moved into my place. I thanked the guys for helping. I would thank them later financially. On Sunday, we finished organizing her clothes and things. Rebecca sublet her apartment, leaving her furniture except for her chair and a few paintings and a sculpture she had bought in England. No matter how much time we had spent together, long weekends, sleepovers, and nights out, it is different when you actually live together. Maybe it's the fact that there's no haven to run to once you give up own place and live 24/7 in the same home. The process of settling in together began and finished that weekend. It was all good. About 6 months later, I received a very interesting call from Apex Software, the company that had bought my inventory control program. They wanted to make some modifications and expand it, and felt that I was the best qualified to make the changes. I was offered a job as a consultant and a percentage of any future sales. This percentage was worth much more than the royalty I had gotten on the original program. Best of all, I could work on it in my spare time and from home. I told Apex that I needed to check with my employer to make sure we didn't have a conflict of interest and that I would get back to them in a few days. They encouraged me to hurry as they wanted to get the new version up and running and available for sales very soon. No time like the present, I thought, and went to Bill Myers' office. I practically ran the department, but he was the head of it and technically my boss. I sat down, told him what was going on with Apex, and asked his opinion. Bill said he thought I could go ahead, but let's find out, and picked up his phone. "Hello, Sylvia. It's Bill Myers in IT. Is he in, and can I get a few minutes with him?" He waited for about 10 seconds and said, "We'll be right up." Bill motioned to me to follow him, and we went to the elevator. Noticing the puzzled look on my face, he explained, "We'll check with the boss and see what he wants to do. If he gives his okay, then go for it." "The boss, who?" I started to ask, and then realized he was talking about Mr. Coleman himself. I hadn't seen Mr. Coleman since the Christmas party, and I wasn't looking forward to the meeting. Rebecca hadn't said, and I hadn't asked about how her daddy felt about us living together. He knew about her wild life during and just after college, but that wasn't up close and personal. Rebecca and I being together was the talk of the company and right in his face. Bill and I walked into the big man's office and was greeted by a receptionist, a very pretty young woman. She told us we could go right into the inner office. The inner office was commanded by Mr. Coleman's personal assistant, Sylvia Jackson. If Cindy, the girl at the Christmas party, was a trophy date, then Sylvia was the first-place trophy of personal assistants. She was about 40, a dark-haired beauty with big green eyes and a body just this side of a young Marilyn Monroe. Sylvia stood to greet Bill, and he introduced me to her. One look into her eyes, and you knew that as attractive as she was, That wasn't the reason Mr. Coleman hired her. Her eyes showed intelligence and a self-confidence that would make her an asset to any corporate executive. When Bill told her who I was, she smiled and said, "So this is Sir White Knight. We've heard all about you, Jamie." I didn't know if I should be complimented or scared. "What? I mean, who, how?" I stuttered. She laughed, interrupting me, and told us, "You can go right in. Mr. Coleman is expecting you." Into the lion's den, I thought as we entered the office. I wasn't looking forward to this. If the consultant fee and percentage of sales potential hadn't been so large, I would have forgotten the whole thing. "Bill, Jamie, good morning. What can I do for my IT team?" We both greeted him, and Bill explained the offer I had received. We gave Jamie the okay to sell the original program, and I don't believe that we can use the software or its modifications. I think we should give him the okay to do the job on his own. Mr. Coleman asked both Bill and I a few probing questions and stopped to think for a couple of minutes. He may appear to some to be just another playboy industrialist, but he was a very astute businessman who never passed up a chance to improve his company or make money. The 2 or 3 minutes while he was quietly thinking seemed like forever, at least to me. The consultant's job would mean an extra income, but I already made a very good salary and could live very well without it. Although Mr. Coleman hadn't said anything about it, his reaction to Rebecca and me was what I was worrying about. Finally, he said, "I agree with you, Bill. I don't see where this software could help JC well. Go for it, Jamie, and congratulations. Just make sure you work on it on your own time. Don't shortchange us, okay?" I nodded, thanked him, and Bill and I started to leave his office. "Stay back, will you, Jamie? I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes," Mr. Coleman requested. It wasn't actually a request, more like a command. After Bill left, Mr. Coleman led me to a seating area that was less formal and motioned for me to sit. He looked at me for another damn 2 minutes, chuckled at my discomfort, and patted me on the shoulder. "Don't look so glum, Jamie. You're not facing a firing squad here. I wanted to talk about Rebecca and you," he explained. Oh boy, I thought, here it comes. "Keep away from my daughter if you like your job," and other ultimatums ran through my mind. Continuing my thoughts, I realized that it was going to be a bummer to quit my job, but I wasn't going to cut things off with Rebecca. I cared more about her than about Coleman's job or company. I braced myself to tell him to take his job and shove it. "I've heard the gossip and rumors concerning you and Rebecca," he said. He waited a few seconds to judge my reaction, and when I didn't give one, he continued. "I know that you two are living together." Another pause, and then, "I'm very glad that Rebecca has someone that cares about her. From what I understand, her wild ways are behind her. Thank you for that." Rebecca's change in lifestyle really didn't have much to do with me, but I couldn't tell Mr. Coleman that without cheating confidence, so I kept my mouth shut. I nodded as he talked, too surprised to do much more. "I'm not trying to pressure you or push you, but there's something you need to know if you two decide to get married. My lawyers will demand that you sign a prenuptial agreement to protect the company." He held up his hand to stop my reaction to his statement. "I don't want you to think I don't trust you or your motives. It's just a business decision. If I had my way, I wouldn't worry about it, but the board of directors will insist on it. I just wanted you to understand." Bullshit, I thought. You run the board, and this company, they don't run you. But then again, he didn't have to try and make me feel better. That's assuming Rebecca and I decide to get married. I told him I understood and went back to my office. Rebecca and I took a weekend off from all the awards dinners, charity function, and art show openings. Instead, we went on a camping trip. She had been bugging me to take her. She said she'd gone camping as a little girl and wanted to sleep under the stars with me. We didn't sleep outside because it started to rain, but we did have a tent and cuddled all night. The next afternoon, we were in a boat on the lake fishing. This was something else she had done as a little girl.